Comcast is launching a streaming app store 10 years too late. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos is considering buying CNBC. NBCU is launching a sports channel and linear ads still dominate. Listen on.
Welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Stream. This is Will Richmond from Video News, and that was Colin Dixon from N-Screen Media, of course. At the top there, Colin, staying cool again as we roast here in Boston.
I am. Well, it's very unusually cool here in California, but I tell you what, Will, I feel like I've just jumped into my hot tub time machine because there has been so much news this week about, I think, quite retro, backward-looking moves from media and various other people in the TV industry. It's been amazing. It's like I feel like we're in also Throwback Thursday, but we're going to get on and talk about some of these interesting moves. And you're going to get us started, right, with Comcast?
Yes, and that's a good description. So this week, Comcast announced that it is going to launch something it's calling Stream Store, which is, they're describing as a way to manage SVOD, streaming content, sign up for subscriptions, manage your subscriptions to different streaming services, etc. All of that looks, and that's just for Xfinity Internet and Xfinity TV subscribers. So it's, again, only within their footprint for their customers. So the idea certainly is a sound one. I think consumers are looking to kind of simplify their experience with streaming. We know that the fragmentation in the market is a challenge and that there's value to be added. I'd say the only problem with the Stream Store is that Amazon, with Amazon Prime Channels, launched this exact concept 10 years ago now.
2015.
Just absolutely remarkable to think that they have been doing this for 10 years, and here comes Comcast 10 years late to the party with Stream Store. And the results of Amazon having pioneered this market really speak for themselves, because we did a podcast with Jonathan Carson from Antenna about 7 months ago where he reviewed data from their State of Subscriptions report at the time that was focused on specialty SVOD services, which are basically all services outside of the big 5 or 6 services. Remarkably, Amazon Prime Channels accounts for 58% of all signups for specialty streaming services. 13 million people tried specialty SVOD services in the past year leading up to last fall. Amazon was responsible for 31 million people transacting with specialty SVOD services. And just to put Amazon's dominance of aggregating and offering streaming subscriptions to its customers, they're 58% by far number one. What follows is iTunes or Apple at 11%. And then you get down to other players that have big footprints in the CTV space, like Roku, and they're only at 6%. So they're basically 1/10 of what Amazon does in the specialty streaming space. This is now, in 2025, at long last, an area that Comcast is entering with the Stream Store concept. So, we were joking before we got started. In the Amazon report, they have a very nice bar chart that shows what the share is for each of these services for signing up specialty SVOD services, again, with Amazon at the top there at 58%. And you and I were kind of just joking a little bit, like when Jonathan does this data rerun, let's say in September of 26, so call it 12, 13 months from now, after Stream Store has been in the market for a while, what percentage do we think Stream Store is going to have, given that Roku, for its gigantic footprint, only has 6%, and they've been out there for years with their aggregation offering as well. Do you think they're even going to crack 1%, Colin, or is that even being generous?
I don't. I think they'll be in the other category, Will.
The other
I don't even think they will register. I mean, come on. This is, as you say, look, this is pretty typical of cable companies. I mean, and one of the things Comcast has been a master of in the past is sort of sitting on the sidelines and waiting for a technology to prove itself, and then they jump in. So they did this with broadband, they did this with the DVR, right? And both have been tremendous successes for them over the years. But it just doesn't. This approach doesn't work in the internet age when everything is in the cloud. You know, if you sit on your hands while something proves itself, monsters will be made and they'll be so difficult to overcome. So, you know, just as you say, I think they'll have very, very little success with this approach.
Yeah, and I'm going to actually put an asterisk on your comment that they have been successful at sitting on the sidelines and then jumping in. Broadband is a completely fluky product for the cable industry.
Yeah.
It's been out there now for 25 years. It really was a better mousetrap at the time relative to telephone modems. And remarkably, after all these years, it's in a lot of ways still the best mousetrap out there. There are other ways to get broadband in your home, whether it's fiber or satellite or even wireless broadband. None of those technologies has really fully broken the dominance that cable broadband has. There are just some underlying economic reasons, technology reasons, and so forth that cable provided broadband has been as successful as it is. But I'd say, you know, not to pick on you, but debunking the idea that they've successfully sat on the sidelines and then followed, I think an example where they sat on the sidelines that became a complete financial black hole for them is Peacock, right? Peacock, they sat on the sidelines. They sat on the sidelines for years after Netflix had launched and everybody else. They finally launched Peacock. That has, I think, given them about a $6 or $7 billion hole to date and counting. They've managed to stanch the bleeding a little bit. The losses have been reduced, but I think the aggregate losses on Peacock since launch are now in the $6 to $7 billion range. And, you know, reminder that Peacock completely changed its strategy also since its launch. Peacock was positioned day one in the big Radio City presentation that they did as a free service, free. That's what we heard from Linda Yaccarino and other NBCU executives. It didn't take long for Peacock to turn from a free service to a paid service, and recently they increased the monthly rate by $3 per month. It's gone up now to $11. And so I think they're still today, even to date, still struggling with how to make Peacock a successful, profitable service. Not to say they haven't made progress with it, but it's just a complete also-ran compared to, as an example, Netflix. So Amazon is the 800-pound gorilla in aggregating specialty SVOD signups, 58%. And Netflix and, of course, YouTube are the 800-pound gorillas in the overall premium streaming space, let's say.
Yeah, and that actually is a nice transition to our next throwback move, and that is that the Wall Street Journal is reporting that NBCU is discussing launching a sports cable network. Yes, you heard me right. They're considering launching a sports cable network that would probably debut as early as this fall. And the channel will primarily be carrying sports that are also streamed on Peacock. Now, this is, I think, they say that the discussions are still in the early stages, and they haven't made a final decision as to whether they're actually going to be launching this or not. But it wouldn't surprise me if they did, Will. And the reason is, I think you hit upon it right when you said that they just increased the price of Peacock by $3. There is still a substantial number of people who are solidly sitting with a cable TV subscription and aren't ready to cut the cord yet. So I think launching a cable network gives them an opportunity to monetize things like the NBA, which many people seem to think is one of the drivers for this $3 increase. So being able to put NBA on a sports network on cable systems would allow them to continue to sort of spread the monetization of those sports assets over a broader group of folks. So, and in fact, that is exactly what a guy called Patrick Crakes, who's a sports media consultant, said. He doesn't seem to think it's going to cannibalize Peacock, and it's a pay TV product for people who are stubborn about leaving the bundle. And I think he's probably right. You know, this is a good way of monetizing it. But this is the odd thing about this, Will. They just made this announcement about spinning all of their cable assets out into this thing called Versant. And I'm thinking, well, why didn't they just repurpose one of these crappy channels that they're pushing out into Versant, into this sports network? It already has distribution on all of the cable systems. They just repurpose it and make it this sports cable channel. Why? I don't know. But
just to jump in and address that point, Colin, just talk about Throwback Thursday, hearkening back to my first 8 years of my professional career working for Continental Cablevision. I don't think that under the standard carriage agreements between cable, satellite, and telephone company operators of video services, bundled video services, that with those agreements with cable networks, I don't think that they're allowed to just change the programming format willy-nilly from some other, format to now being sports and retain the distribution. I think they lose their distribution right, or it has to be renegotiated, maybe at a minimum, if they wholesale change their content format, their programming format.
Okay, well, but still, here they are dumping cable, and they're going to start a cable network. But I guess there is some sense behind it, right?
Well, right. I was going to say, the changing the programming format of an existing channel or not, I think that's sort of a side issue to your point. The main issue is whether launching a network like this, sports network, makes any sense at all. And I concur with you about the idea of having something out there on linear through cable that still appeals to the folks that have not cut the cord. I think that does make sense. However, it seems like the fine print on this new sports network is that it's not going to be available in the sort of the broadest available tiers. Rather, it's going to be probably available only on a sports tier. Those sports tiers are a minority of overall cable subscribers, and the percentage of those people subscribing is probably only going in one direction as well. Cord cutting, obviously, we know is bringing the overall market down, but arguably because so many more sports are now available on streaming, the number of people who feel compelled to pay extra beyond their cable subscription to subscribe to a sports tier is also declining. So putting it up there in a sports tier, the new NBC Sports Network, whatever it's called, in a sports tier on cable seems like, I'm not going to say it's a nothing burger, but it's, in my view, pretty close to a nothing burger. I don't know. Do you disagree? Is it a something burger to you?
No. I tell you, I have a different motivation here, and that is, I want them to be able to monetize NBA in more ways, so that me, who is a Peacock subscriber, isn't stuck with paying for the NBA when I don't care about it. So, I want them to be able to monetize this in different ways to minimize the impact on my wallet.
Well, if you're not an NBA fan and now you're getting hit with a $3 per month increase for your Peacock subscription, it just means that the bar has gotten ever higher for you to retain your Peacock subscription. And like everybody else, you have full choice whether to, one click drop your subscription, right?
Well, it has got me considering cancelling outside of Premier League season, Will. While we're here and talking about starting cable networks, there was another story, Will, that Jeff Bezos apparently is considering buying CNBC. And this sounds like, well, actually, this sounds like Bezos, right? Because he bought the Washington Post, so he thinks he can do things with old media. But I tell you what, this one really mystifies me. Why would you buy something like CNBC? I mean, in the article I was looking at, it was struggling to sort of justify this, saying it was a good addition to his portfolio, serving as a neutral voice in his expanding media portfolio, a strategic addition. All of this sounds like nonsense to me. I can't imagine why you would want to buy CNBC. Can you?
Yes, I can imagine it
Go on
actually.
then. Go on then.
Well, the first thing I think to know about Jeff Bezos is when you're worth $240 billion, you can buy anything you want to, and it barely creates a ripple in the pond. So CNBC, I'm just making this up. My guess is that CNBC is not even worth $1 billion. It's probably worth closer to 500 million. Who knows? But so it's a pittance to someone like Jeff Bezos. He bought the Washington Post. He has run the Post, I think, in a relatively even-handed way. It's not to say they haven't had their hiccups, but I think generally speaking, until somewhat recently, he's been pretty even-handed. I think it would not surprise me if he believes that there needs to be a business-focused property that remains relatively even-handed. CNBC is a great franchise in business news. It's been around since the beginning of time. And also keep in mind that I think Bloomberg TV and radio have gained share in recent years. So Bezos may see an opportunity to kind of have his, entry in the business news segment. And when you say the media portfolio, I think it probably is complementary in some ways to the Washington Post. You could imagine Post subscriptions being driven through CNBC ads and vice versa. So, and also you could certainly see CNBC having a role within Amazon Prime channels more than it does right now. So, yeah, I think I'm not bowled over by this move, but it would not surprise me in the least either.
Well, those all sound pretty reasonable to me, Will. Sounds like the people who wrote this story should have talked to you
Yeah.
for justification of why he's buying it.
I mean, I really think that the thing that, I'll just say from my personal perspective, when you have that much money, like, don't overthink why people do certain things. You have $240 billion. You wake up on the left side of the bed this morning and you decide you're going to spend 500 million on something. Like, it's just not a big deal. It's like spending $10 for you and me. We're not going to overthink the idea to spend $10 on a sandwich or whatever. That's the perspective that one needs to have when thinking about someone of Jeff Bezos's wealth. So, the rest of what I said is just additive, but I think that's really the primary thing in my view.
Yeah, maybe. Well, maybe there's another reason, right? We saw new data on how much ad impressions are still obtained by linear, right?
Yeah, we did. So there was some data out this week that linear continues to get 86% of ad impressions. I thought on the face of it, that number seems high, right? We just talked maybe 2 weeks ago on the podcast about the fact that streaming in May had higher viewership share than the combination of cable and broadcast. So on the face of it, it might be like, whoa, 86%, that seems higher than it should be. I think the 80%, 86% is maybe a little bit murky because the ad load on broadcast and cable is give or take about 3 times the level of the ad load on streaming services. Of course, that's one of the reasons why ad-supported streaming has become as popular as it has, is because the ad load is so much more tolerable than on traditional TV. So the 3x, I think, gives the linear world a big boost. The other thing I think to remember is that even though streaming now exceeds the combination of cable and broadcast, broadcast has actually held up decently well in the last 4 or 5 years as Nielsen has been publishing the gauge data. And of course, the base of broadcast and cable viewership is really high, even though it's sort of like a melting iceberg in a way. It's just starts from such a place of dominance that when you combine that, even with the declines, with the 3x ad load, you probably can see how you get to 86%. Having said that, in the first half of the year, streaming viewership was up 44%. Broadcast was up 3.3%. So those lines are only converging. That 86% number is certainly a high watermark. It's only going in one direction at this point. The only question is how quickly does it go?
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that I did was I tried to figure out how much advertising we're really seeing today. I think that 86% is actually focused on a much smaller proportion of viewing than it was before. And here's why. So, if you look 10 years ago, most people were still watching cable and traditional broadcast, right? And when they were doing that, they were probably watching an average of about 16 minutes of advertising an hour, more if you were watching more cable, slightly less if you were watching broadcast. Well, what I did to try and figure out what we're watching today, Will, is I looked at TiVo, and TiVo in their video trends report, they sort of gave a division of time spent watching TV for the average person between all of the different service types. So, pay TV, broadcast, and SVOD, etc. And then I sort of came up with the average ad loads for each of those. And when I cranked all those numbers around, by the way, I'll drop a link in my posting to that piece so that you can see how I did the numbers. But when you crank the number around, I think the average person now is watching about 9.5 minutes. I think it came out to about 9.5 minutes of ads per hour of viewing. And if you are a broadband only subscriber and you're not watching cable bundle at all, you don't have a virtual MVPD, you are seeing way less. You're probably watching 5 minutes, maybe 6 minutes an hour on average. That advertising load is really focused on a much smaller proportion of viewing, and actually in a much smaller proportion of people.
And I'll just add to that, Colin, personal anecdote that I know I've mentioned this before, but I'm a Netflix ad tier subscriber myself. And when I watch a show that is, let's say, The Crown, where an episode is 45 minutes long, I would be surprised if there's more than 4 minutes of ads during that entire episode. There's always an ad or two at the beginning. So there's always call it 30 seconds, 45 seconds of ads at the beginning. I think that there are no more in a 45-minute episode of The Crown. There's no more than maybe 2 or 3 ad breaks at the most. Each ad break is probably, again, 30 to 45 seconds. So maybe a max of 5 minutes of ad time during an episode of The Crown. And I don't know if The Crown is typical for Netflix. I haven't really kept track on other shows that I watch on Netflix, but it's striking. The ad load is so light, so light. It's such a great experience. And of course, for Netflix, I think they now have the largest difference between their ad-free and their ad-supported tiers. It's up to $7, $8 a month now, something like that.
Yep. And I can tell you, Tubi is my go-to fast service because its ad load similarly is very, very, very low. I'm very comfortable watching the ad load on that service. But I guess the last thing to do is we should pour some cold water here a little bit on all this activity on cable, because the truth is, as we've talked about, and as I'm sure our viewers realize, there is only one direction that we're seeing with cable, and that is down. And we actually have some new or some more information on that. I was listening to the Varsity podcast with John Uand, and he was interviewing our friend Michael Nathanson, who's appeared on our podcast. And so this is really focused on sports. Also, they were talking about the dynamics impacting sports in today's media world. And I really recommend you give this a listen if you're interested in this. It was a really great conversation about primarily oriented around sports. But what Michael said was really stuck out to me. Well, he was talking about where he thought the pay TV bundle, or I should say, let's call it the cable bundle, is going. And with cable, I think he's including in there the virtual MVPDs because it's the same business model, right? And as he was talking, he said that he thought at one time, he thought that was sort of the floor for those subscribers was about 50 million. Well, he's revised that. And now what he actually said was, I think 50 is wrong. 25 to 35 is where we are headed. And, I think he's absolutely right. If you look at the data today, and I have a tracker on this, if you want to track this on my website, just come to nscreenmedia.com, look under trackers and look for US traditional pay TV and VMVPDs. Where we are today is that there are about 70 million cable households or traditional cable bundle subscriptions. So I'm adding together there the virtual MVPDs and the traditional pay TVs, and it's basically comprised of about 50 million cable satellite telco homes and 20 million virtual MVPD homes. And what Michael is saying is he thinks that that's going to drop to 25 to 35 million. I think next year or early 2027, we will see more homes in the US without a cable bundle than with it. And as Michael says, we're headed to halve that in some period of time. And I'm betting that that's before the end of the decade. So there's no way back for the cable bundle. I think it's just down. So these investments in cable channels, they're short-term investments which will provide short-term wins. They're not long-term strategies.
Well, and as we know, the industry is disinvesting in cable networks with the various spin-offs and sales and so forth that are going on. I would just say, for my part, I think that 25 to 35 million, or any other estimates for that matter of what the floor is, are just really guesstimates. Nobody really knows. And with every new sports rights deal that gets signed, whether it's the rumor with Apple and F1, or now, of course, the deal with Amazon and NBA, or, the list goes on and on. As we know, we need to recite those. It just brings the floor down that much further. But actually quantifying the floor is, I think, really a moving target. So, I have no doubt that Michael will be updating his number in short order as well, because new things are happening all the time in the sports streaming world, as we know.
Yep.
I think that wraps it for today, Colin, right? We covered a lot of ground this week. A little bit of Throwback Thursday, as you said.
Yeah.
Crazy world we live in, huh?
Yep, it is indeed. But as you say, I think we're just about done for this week.
Okay, so good chatting. And everybody, thanks for joining us and listening in on this week's edition of Inside the Stream. And we will see you all again next week. Inside the Stream is a production of In-Screen Media and Video News, all rights reserved.